Hello and welcome to my 5.1 Arcane Mage guide. You can see what we will be covering, and you can click on any topic to jump to it. For the single target rotation, I will be explaining the Scorch Weaving method. This seems to be the favored rotation for Arcane Mages in top-end progression rating guilds. For this rotation, you want to be using Rune of Power, and you want to keep its uptime at 100%. This means refreshing it before it dissipates. You want to be using the Nether Tempest Bomb, and you want 100% uptime on this as well. This means refreshing it at less than 1 second remaining. Each time Nether Tempest does damage, it has a chance to proc your arcane missiles. For the Scorch Weaving rotation, you never want to lose your 6 stack of arcane charge. So this means you never use Arcane Barrage in your normal rotation. However, keeping up 6 stacks indefinitely using Arcane Blast and Arcane Missiles will lead you to running out of mana. So you're going to have to use Scorch in your rotation. Scorch also has a chance to proc Arcane Missiles. Scorch costs 300 mana, so it's practically free, as well as Arcane Missiles, which costs no mana at all. And keep in mind, Nether Tempest only costs 5,000 mana as well, while Arcane Blast under 6 charges costs you 25,000 mana. For the Scorch Weaving rotation, you want to stay under 100% mana, never try to reach it, and you want to try to stay above 80% mana to take the full advantage of your mastery. To stay above 80% mana, it requires you, while under 90% mana, to use a filler spell between every Arcane Blast. These filler spells are anything but your Arcane Blast, so that includes Arcane Missiles, Nether Tempest, Rune of Power, and Scorch. Whenever you have an Arcane Missile proc, you want to use it immediately. The exception is when you're under 80% mana, in which case you want to Scorch until you reach 80% mana. However, if you proc a second charge, use it and don't hold on to 2 charges ever. So when you're under 90% mana and don't have to cast any other filler spell besides Scorch, this is when you use Scorch. So when you're under 90% mana and don't have to refresh your Nether Tempest, Rune of Power, or have an Arcane Missile proc, this is when you have to use Scorch. Scorch is a low damage spell, so you only want to use it as long as you have to. Casting it between every Arcane Blast, you may only have to cast it once or twice between procs. Depending on your luck, you may not have to cast Scorch for quite a while during a fight. And if you find yourself in that oh crap moment, I'm at 60% mana, I wasn't paying attention, I didn't cast Scorch when I should have, this is when you use a mana gem. If you die and get battle res during a boss fight, you use Arcane Blast to get yourself back up to 6 stacks of Arcane Charge, and after that you don't use it in your rotation until you're above 80% mana. You use Scorch instead of Arcane Blast, and use a mana gem if it's not on cooldown. For fights where you have to move, you take a big hit in your damage, because you are unable to cast Arcane Blast and Arcane Missiles, which are your 2 major sources of DPS. Instead, your major damaging spell becomes Scorch while moving, and you use Arcane Explosion to refresh your 6 stacks of Arcane Charge. This also has a chance, 30%, to add another stack to it if you're not at 6. Continue to keep up your Nether Tempest, and if possible, stand in your Rune of Power while moving. Alright, now let's talk about your opener and your cooldowns. For your opener, you're going to put a Rune of Power under you, use your mirror images, pre-pot, and pre-cast your first Arcane Blast to make it land when the boss is pulled. Then you build up to your 6 stacks of Arcane Charge and use your cooldown macro, which will activate Arcane Power, Alter Time, and any unused trinkets you may have, and Berserking and the Engineering Gloves enchant. Before you activate it, ideally you should have already procced 2 Arcane Missiles. If you haven't, continue to cast Arcane Blast until you do, and if your mana is below 90%, use a mana gem to bring yourself back up to full mana, and then hit your cooldown macro. After you use the macro, use your Arcane Missile charges, and then cast Arcane Blast once or twice if you have enough haste to still be able to cast an Arcane Barrage before the Alter Time wears off, and then continue with your normal rotation. Now is where I would like to have covered the Arcane AoE rotation, but to be honest with you, I don't think it's viable. What I've found that works best so far is keeping up Nether Tempest, standing in a Rune of Power, Arcane Explosion to 6 stacks, and then using Arcane Missiles on proc, otherwise Arcane Explosion. However, this still does not provide results that are equivalent to Fire or Frost AoE, and depending on the number of targets, less damage than single targeting. On fights like Blade Lord or Stone Guard or Will, where there are multiple targets, I recommend you being Fire or Frost. Now let's talk about Glyphs, Talents, and Reforging. For Glyphs, there's really no mandatory glyphs for Arcane. Nothing provides a direct DPS increase. However, I highly recommend Glyph of Arcane Explosion, because when you're moving around, the extra 5 yards might be the difference between you hitting the boss or not, and keeping your 6 stacks up. Glyph of Arcane Power increases the duration of the buff, but also increases the duration of the cooldown, the same ratio, so it doesn't result in any direct increase in DPS. However, if used under Heroism, you can get 15 more seconds under Heroism. And then I use Glyph of Evocation to help the healers. Minor glyphs are not useful for raiding, so do whatever you want. For talents, with the Scorch Weaving build, the first tier is mandatory to have Scorch. Second tier is up to you, your choice. However, I use Blazing Speed for any fight that involves movement to reduce the downtime that I'm moving. Third tier is not mandatory, but the only talent you're going to use in here is Ring of Frost for raiding. Fourth tier, I highly recommend Cauterize, because you never know when you're going to get one shot by the boss. Greater Invisibility is useful, but I wouldn't put it above Cauterize unless you're doing Heroic Elegon and on the Soak team. Nether Tempest is going to be the bomb you want because it's hands down the highest DPS of them all. For your last tier, since as Arcane you cannot do good DPS while moving, you're going to want to use Rune of Power, which is more DPS than Invocation if you're not moving. And don't use Incanter's Ward. It's never been good for raiding, and until they fix it or there's a special case encounter, I don't foresee it ever being useful. Reforging as Arcane is very simple. You go first, hit to cap 15%, and then you reforge as much as you possibly can into Mastery, and then your second most valuable stat is Haste, and then your least valuable stat is Crit. Now let's talk about add-ons. And I only want to talk about add-ons that are Mage, Arcane specific. First I want to talk about a simple one called Arcanometer, which I found a week ago on Curse, which is an add-on specifically designed for Arcane Mages. It shows your Nether Tempest bomb and its duration and how many Arcane charges you have. And my favorite part of it is where it shows how much mana you have. But it's not your default mana bar. This zooms in, and by default it's set to zoom into the top 20% of your mana, so you can more clearly see how much mana you have and manage it better. The next add-on I want to talk about is called Weak Auras. I'm a little bit familiar with this because last expansion I used Power Auras Classic, and they're relatively the same thing. I use this add-on to track my Rune of Power duration and when it's not active, as well as my Arcane Barrage 6 stack for how long it's gonna last. I use Quartz to replace the standard UI cast bar, and I've never gone back. I've used the same one forever. The cast bar is enlarged, shows an icon of what you're casting, gives you a nice progressive bar and duration, and shows how much pushback you receive, as well as gives you a latency indicator for when you should start casting your next spell. And I also use Elcano buff bar to track my Nether Tempest Bomb. That's all I really want to get into for add-ons. I'll post a link to my Weak Auras export for those of you interested in it. And if you have any questions about add-ons, feel free to post in the comments section. Now you might be wondering, who am I? Who's SpecFood to tell you how to play an Arcane Mage? Well, let me explain a few things about myself to you first. I've played this game since vanilla. I played a healer until Burning Crusade, at which point I switched to this mage, and have played this mage as my main since then. I've always been in a serious raiding guild, and most recently the guild I've joined is LA, which is a world-class 25-man raiding guild. Currently we are ranked 300 world, 100 US, and we are attempts away from Leishi Heroic and Will Heroic, which will boost our rank substantially. And this playstyle is also used by other mages in my guild, which includes a player named Theories, which is a world-class mage who holds 62 ranks on World of Logs and multiple specs, many including Arcane. I'll post a link below to our guild website and our World of Logs repository. Thanks for watching, and good luck post